En la antigua Grecia, aunque parezca...
Though it may seem strange, the first banks in ancient Greece were the great temples. Temples enjoyed considerable prestige. They had autonomy. They had their own security forces. And they were considered sacred and unassailable places. It should not surprise us that individuals spontaneously realized that when they wished to store their money, perhaps the safest place to do so was a temple, precisely because temples were considered inviolable. They had their own militias, and they somehow inspired great trust in the citizens. It has been shown that temples like Apollo in Delphi, Artemis in Ephesus, and Hera in Samos acted as depositories of citizens' money and maintained a 100% reserve ratio. In other words, they initially complied with the safekeeping obligation. Later, gradually, with the commercial development of the different Greek cities throughout the Mediterranean, private individuals began to take on the role of bankers as depositories. Fortunately, we have documentary evidence. It has survived to this day of some of these activities. The most important piece of evidence is contained in a legal speech, a defense written by Isocrates in the 4th century BC and known as Trapezitica. Isocrates was a student of Socrates and ended up earning his living as a logographer. In other words, he wrote legal speeches to defend his clients in court. And Trapezitica deals specifically with a lawsuit over a banking transaction. Isocrates is defending the interests of his client against those of a banker named Passio, who operated his business in Athens. The client was the son of a favorite of Satyrus, the king of Bosphorus, and had made a large deposit of gold in Passio's bank. And when he went to withdraw it, Passio did not have the tantundum at the disposal of the depositor and could not return the money. So, what does this reveal? Well, first, that Passio had acted outside general legal principles. Second, Isocrates explains in the speech that his client has been extremely patient because he has kept quiet for many months while trying to get Passio to return his money, and that only in the end, when the client has realized it is no use, has he pursued the corresponding lawsuit. The banker makes every attempt to avoid the problem and to evade responsibility. He asks the customer to please not tell anyone he could not return the money, because if people found out, Passio would lose all of his prestige, and all confidence in his bank would plummet and disappear. Then, on top of that, when Passio finds himself caught between a rock and a hard place, when the news is about to be made public, he lies like a scoundrel and claims it is false that the customer deposited money with him. Passio claims it was the other way around, that the customer owed him a debt, and that the banker kept the money for that reason. He disappears the slaves who acted as witnesses to the transaction. We do not know how he does it, whether he pays their passage on a trip or simply ties a rock to them and throws them into the sea. He forges all kinds of documents. He resorts to bribery. He manipulates contracts. And in the end, what happens? Well, in Trapezitica, we have only the text of the lawsuit. We do not know what the ruling was. In any case, from our perspective, there are very significant conclusions to be drawn. First, that bankers in Greece were aware of their safekeeping obligation. Second, that not all of them acted honestly and correctly, Passio, for instance, but instead some of them surreptitiously violated these principles. Third, that they made every attempt to avoid being caught, that is, exposed, in the illegal act of misappropriation. They had tremendous power because they lent money, and many people depended on them for future financing. So who would dare to criticize or sue a banker? They brought all of their power to bear to discourage the withdrawal of deposits. The phenomenon is constant throughout history. Bankers have enormous power, and they use it to intimidate their enemies and in any way possible to hinder and discourage depositors who wish to withdraw their deposits. Different studies show that in ancient Greece, bankers mainly received deposits and charged a fee for the service, and that in general they did not act as sources of financing, except in very special cases, in which they did act as true financial intermediaries. By the way, where does the title trapezitica come from? It comes from the Greek trapeza, which means table, because bankers worked behind a table at a certain spot in the city. That is why they are called tabulari, numulari, etc. Sometimes bankers worked at a bench, and thus the term banchieri, which is the origin of the word bankruptcy. When bankers were unable to pay, the bench they worked behind was taken and, bam, broken over their heads. Bankruptcy.